Hey, I'm Callie. Thanks so much for watching Graceland Online. Graceland Church exists to see lives transformed in the neighborhoods, the generations, and the nations through Jesus Christ. The teaching that you're about to hear is based on the Bible, and we believe that it will be inspiring and relevant to your life. And if you're here because you're searching for answers to tough questions and looking for help on how to navigate life, we would love for you to text us with any questions or if you just need someone to talk to. And again, thanks for watching Graceland Online. We're praying for you, and we hope that this video will be an encouragement to you on your spiritual journey.
Hey, Nate Millican here, one of the leaders at Graceland Church here for Graceland Online. Thanks again for taking a moment to be with us. I hope that you have been encouraged and even refreshed, even challenged about some of the topics that Ryan, Larry, and Tim have discussed about reasons for God, evidence for God. Even today, I had a conversation with a guy who doesn't go to our church talking about, hey, are you a religious or a spiritual guy? Is that your background? He said, no, I'm really not. And he said, and I so appreciate his honesty, I just haven't found much evidence for God. And my response was, hey, thanks for being honest. And so we're going to talk more at a later date. But maybe that's you. Or maybe you have a friend or spouse or a child that perhaps would benefit from some of the previous episodes or even this episode as we talk about the reality of the resurrection, the reality of the resurrection. Now, you're at Clark Memorial Hospital. You're at Baptist Floyd Health, two hospitals in the southern Indiana region. And you heard there was a man or a woman, Joe Smith, Rebecca Smith, pronounced dead in the last hour. Or to even be a little bit more morbid, there was a body in the morgue, and you got wind through some relationships, some friendships, that this person who had been pronounced dead hours, days ago, had apparently come back to life. And you say, unequivocally, no way, not going to happen. Those things don't happen. We live in a materialistic, naturalistic world. Supernatural events like the resurrection and people coming back from the dead just don't happen. And so you get in your car and you drive to Clark Memorial and you drive to Baptist Floyd Health. And sure enough, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people gathering around to see this man, to see this woman who had been dead, right? Muscles that had become atrophied were having life. Blood that had ceased to run through their veins was now running. Brain stimulation brain activity that was absent for hours and days. Their brain is working, they're talking, they're engaged, they're responding. A miracle, a modern day miracle. Now, when we think about the resurrection, for a lot of modern day thinkers, we engage in what a guy named C.S. Lewis called, he was a philosopher, he was formerly an agnostic. He wasn't sure there really was enough evidence or knowledge to really believe in a God, let alone the God of the Bible. And he had some friends over the course of his life, answered questions, and as he began to think, he finally came to a point where he really believed that the God of the Bible was true. And so he had a personal faith in the God of the Bible, Jesus. But he coined a phrase called chronological snobbery. Chronological snobbery. And that phrase, chronological snobbery, is this. A lot of times modern day thinkers, 21st century thinkers, we live in a materialistic, naturalistic world, a scientific world where there's analysis and data and physics and all these things that can explain the world in which we live. And so we look back to people in ancient cultures and we might say out loud or in the quietness of our heart, those people of old, those people in ancient cultures and civilizations, they were just gullible. They would immediately accept beliefs or teachings such as the resurrection, such as Noah and the ark, such as the creation of the world by way of God speaking the world into existence. They would believe that Jesus turned water to wine. They would believe in various healings that Jesus supposedly did and were written down in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so we just think of them as dumb. The people of the old, they're just kind of dumb. They're gullible. And so we engage in chronological snobbery. When in fact, if you were to go back and to do research about those ancient cultures, in fact, most of the people in those cultures didn't believe the things that we believe in terms of what we're talking about, the resurrection, and how what's wrong is within us, and that there is actually evidence for knowing God, and believing some of the things that Christianity teaches was out of the ordinary, was countercultural, was shocking, was radical. Now, why do we need to believe in the resurrection? Well, here's just one overarching point. Most of us are pretty poor in terms of self-evaluation, right? We assess ourselves and we'll say things like, I'm a pretty good person, or I'm pretty good at this skill, or I'm a pretty good driver. And then someone looks and says, what in the world are you thinking? A good driver? You're not a good driver. Or we might say, I'm pretty moral, and we'll have somebody speak in our life, hey, you might be a nice person, but man, there's some things that you do in private or even in public that really are unbecoming of what it means to be a nice, religious, good persons. Our brains seemingly are hardwired to give forth and exude positive impressions. I mentioned this a while ago in another episode, but think about high school seniors where only 2% said that they were below average, and a whopping 25% thought that they were in the 1%. Because we have this halo effect where we always want to think of ourselves better than what we really are. And perhaps the most indicting statement is that most people think that they're more likely to provide more accurate self-assessments. The resurrection, the reality of the resurrection is basically, among many things, it's an assessment about the plight, the need, the brokenness for humanity. We'll talk about that another time, but the reason the resurrection matters is because we are all, whether we're Christians or a non-Christian, we are all religious people. You might say spiritual people, you might balk at that, but we believe something. There are values that drive us, the way that we view the world, a worldview, the lens by which we think about how did we get here, and what's wrong with the world, and how do we fix what's broken, what's the answer, or where's the redemption. All of us, whether we're Christian, non-Christian, spiritual, religious, spiritual, religious, have conscious or unconscious answers that we live by, maxims, principles that we live by that guide our lives. And the resurrection for Christians is one of those realities, one of those events that helps us provide an accurate self-assessment. And one of the self-assessments, one of the assessments that God gives to us in the Bible is that we need somebody to intervene into our lives, someone outside of us. The story of Christianity, the belief of Christianity, is among many things an evaluation of us, which is why we need help, which is why the Bible teaches we believe that God intervened, which is why we believe as Christians that God loves us. Jesus came, lived a perfect life, was buried, and rose again through the reality of the resurrection, not to make us nice, not to make us moral, not to make us religious, not to just help us, but to change us. We need to be changed. So what I want to do for just a couple minutes is just kind of give you a couple realities about the Christian life, and then we'll close for this particular episode. One, women in this context of when the Bible was written thousands of years ago experienced a very low social status, which meant, among many things, that their testimony would not be admissible in court. Well, why is that a big deal? Because the first people to witness the resurrection, according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who recorded the events of the resurrection, were women. Well, why in the world would Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John record women whose testimony was not even admissible in court? Why would they include that? Well, of course, the reality is because they actually had seen those things, and despite the low social class of women, which, by the way, you could go and you could do another study about the socioeconomic and sociological teachings of Christianity. Christianity affirmed and brought dignity to women and to children and to physically and mentally handicapped people in a culture, in a context where people would discard and dismiss. Christianity flourished because of their love and acceptance and embracing of people, of persons, when most cultures did not. That's as an aside. Not only were women of a low social status, meaning, as I've already said, that their testimony was not admissible evidence in court, and again, the only possible explanation for what they saw was that they actually saw Jesus resurrect from the grave. We see other evidences of the resurrection. One, the Bible tells us that Jesus appeared to Peter, one of the first followers of Jesus. Another instance is that he appeared to the 12 in the upper room, 12 different men that he appeared to. Thomas was absent, and another time he was present, but Thomas, doubting Thomas, if you've probably heard of him, says, I'm not going to believe unless I actually see him, see the scars, and put my hands in the holes in his hands and his wrist. And the Bible says that Jesus appeared to Thomas. And we know that Thomas was so radically changed. You can go back in history. Thomas was so radically changed that he actually took this message of Jesus to the country of modern day India, and there's history and there's teachings and evidence that he had this ministry and this teaching because he'd been changed by not just what he saw but who he saw. Or we read about in one of the letters, 1 Corinthians, which was written to believers in a town called Corinth, a city called Corinth, that Jesus appeared at once upon one occasion, almost as if he's anticipating people to say, there's no way. The disciples were hallucinating. There's no way they could actually have remembered and seen things accurately. And Paul says he appeared to 500 individuals at once on one occasion. Here's another evidence of the resurrection. In not one single case do we hear the slightest mention of the disappointed followers claiming that their hero had been raised from the dead. They knew better in these particular cultures, ancient cultures. Resurrection was not a private event. Jewish revolutionaries whose leader had been executed by the authorities and who managed to escape arrest themselves had two options: give up the revolution or find another leader. Give up the revolution or find another leader. Claiming that the original leader was alive again was simply not an option, unless, of course, as I'm advocating, it actually was the case. This hero had come back from the grave. This revolutionary leader, this radical leader, Jesus had come back from the grave. There's many more arguments, many more evidences, but lastly, I'll say this. There was this explosion of a new worldview. Up to this point, here's what the early Christians had adopted, and this is what Christians believe today. They adopted a set of beliefs that up to that point was unthinkable. One, they believed that someone was raised from the dead. We don't want to engage in chronological snobbery because that's not something that was a normal way of thinking. They believed that someone had been resurrected from the grave. They worshiped a human being as God. I mean, think about that for a moment. My Lord and my God, Thomas said. They worshiped a human being as God. They subsequently believed that they would actually experience individual resurrections by way of and because of the resurrection of Jesus. And because he had been raised from the dead, they believed that one day they would be raised from the dead and spend an eternity in a real, actual place called heaven. And then lastly, their worldview changed overnight. What changes a person into the very fabric of who they are? Something significant, something radical has to happen that people see for us to be changed internally and for it to change our worldview, our mission, our values, our principles, our beliefs. And that's attributed to the resurrection. As I close, I mentioned this several episodes ago. As you've heard Ryan and Tim and Larry and I talk about various evidences or reasons for God, you need to work these out in the context of a safe, relationship where you can be honest, you can be transparent, you can be vulnerable, you can ask questions, and people can be steadfast and loving and kind. And listen, maybe you need to talk to another Christian, maybe you need to talk to a religious leader as you think through these questions. Did Jesus actually resurrect from the grave? Is the problem really within us? Is there really evidences of God? And we would say yes, yes, and yes. I hope that you were encouraged, perhaps challenged, and even refreshed. If you were, we'd love for you to like this, subscribe to what we're doing here at Graceland Online, and perhaps even share this with a friend. Again, we look forward to seeing you next time here at Graceland Online. Take care.
Thanks again for watching Graceland Online. We hope that God spoke to you today through this video. And again, feel free to text us if you have any questions about anything you heard, or if there's any way that we might be able to help you. And you can also find more videos and resources at gracelandchurch.online. And if you feel that you've been blessed by these videos, please consider donating so that we can continue sharing more content to more people. Thanks again for watching, and we hope you'll join us again soon.